Everyone, welcome to Pathfinder's Perspective, what surviving Ebola can teach us about COVID. So I'm Jess with Search for Common Ground, and I'm so happy to have you all join us today. I know it's crazy times for everyone, so I'm wishing you health and happiness. And a special shout out to our Search supporters. This is all possible because of you, and to our Pathfinders community. So Pathfinders community is all about finding a way through, whether it's through a pandemic or other major issues that we face. So if you want to get connected to our community, gain tips, and receive invites to events like today, please check out, we're going to post a link here in a moment in the comments. So check that out to learn more. So thank you again for joining us today. It's going to be worth your time, I promise. I'm so excited. Today, we're going to be hearing from a truly inspirational human being, Jimmy. Oh my gosh, Jimmy, I knew I was going to do this. Please say your name for everyone.
Sankaituah.
Sankaituah. And we always just refer to Jimmy as Jimmy, so thank you so much for that. And who is our country director of both Sierra Leone and Liberia. So he helped lead our efforts from around Ebola during the outbreak in 2014. And now his insights and experiences are informing all of our country teams in our response to COVID-19. So I'm excited to have him here today to share his story and answer your questions. Yes, we will be opening it up for questions at the end, so super excited for that. But before we get into all of that, I want to give you a tiny bit of background on our organization, Search for Common Ground. So Search for Common Ground is the world's largest dedicated peacebuilding organization with offices all over the world. So we work to end violent and destructive conflict before, after, and during a crisis. Our peacebuilders tackle everything from reconciliation after genocide, countering violent extremism, prevention of mass atrocity, gender-based violence, refugee integration, and a lot more. You might be saying, okay, all those things make sense for peacebuilding, but why a pandemic? Well, I believe after you hear Jimmy's story, you're going to completely see why peacebuilders are so important during a pandemic. So let's get started. Jimmy, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I'm so super excited to again join you after many, many years.
Yes. Okay. So quick side note, Jimmy and I did a streaming event on Google Hangouts on Air in 2014 around Ebola. So this is a little bit of a throwback for us. So I'm so happy to have you back. Thanks so much, Jimmy.
Yeah, sure. Welcome.
Okay. So one of the coolest things about Search is that our peacebuilders are local to the areas that they work in. So 90% of our peacebuilders are local to the areas they work in. So it's not just a course they take in college, but it's life experiences that make them such a powerful force for peace. So before we jump into Ebola and COVID, Jimmy, can you just tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up and how conflict and the Liberian Civil War impacted your youth?
Thank you. Good afternoon to the audience across the globe. It's difficult to summarize what I am, but I will try. So I was born in a small village in Bon County, which is the central region in Liberia. At age 15, the Liberian civil crisis displaced my family. And this made me to live with other displaced families that I never knew. Moving forward, I lived in displaced camps and began playing football, as you call it, soccer. So it was in one of those camps that I began to captain my football team in the displaced camp. And then after all of that, my parents being displaced in 1997 after the elections that ushered in President Charles Taylor, I then made a decision to go and find my mother and the rest of my siblings. So of course, I fortunately reunited with my family, except that I lost my father and one of my brothers. May their soul and the souls of those before and after them rest in perfect peace. After reuniting, I made a decision to resume school, go back to school, since the civil crisis disrupted my education. And in 1999, I did enroll at the St. Augustine Episcopal High School, where I encountered the YMCA of Liberia, where my career began. And then as we moved into the future, I then began the president of my Howard Club, and then subsequently became vice president and president of my local youth council YMCA. And in 2002, I actually won the Best Youth Leader of the Year award in 2002. In December 2002, the same year, I was elected as president of the National Youth Council of the YMCA of Liberia, thereby making me representative of young people of the YMCA in Liberia, national and internationally. And so that gave me the platform to begin to show what leadership skills I had. So in 2005 and in 2007, I was elected vice president and president of the Federation of Liberian Youth, which is the umbrella youth organization of students in Liberia. And so it was my work at the Federation of Liberian Youth that then I encountered Search for Common Ground. And so in 2010, I did not recontest because I had felt that I needed to move on for other young people to step into the roles. So in April of 2010, in March of 2010, Search put out a call for application, and then I did apply and got recruited as project officer. So in 2012, I got promoted as program manager after we won a 4.5 million project that allowed us to be much more visible. So moving through in 2013, September, I was requested to come to Sierra Leone and act as country director when the country director substantive was on vacation. And so I played that role, submitted my report, and went back. Then in March of 2014, a colleague of mine informed me that there was a vacancy in the Sierra Leone office. And so I spoke to my boss, and then I applied. So I went through the recruitment process and got recruited and was deployed. And so I came to Sierra Leone and took over the office on May 6th, and then on May 23rd, Ebola showed its ugly head. Yeah. So that's me.
Yeah, this is such a crazy story. And so first of all, I just want to acknowledge that you are a rock star. So everything that you went through as a young person, and to be able to go through the adversity that you did with being displaced, with losing your father and your brother, and still being able to become a leader for your country and a voice for peace is just so inspirational. And then so you come to Search. And
thank you.
You just land, you're in charge of this new country, and then Ebola hits. What was it like in the beginning for you as a young country director to having to deal with this crisis? And what were people's first reaction when Ebola first hit in the country on the ground?
So I mean, just imagine about 3 weeks into your first international assignment that you are so excited about, and then you enter a country program quite frankly that was failing. You met 4 demotivated staff. There was not much funding to run the organization. Then a virus that the world knew nothing about stuck, and so it was quite confusing. I got confused. I was demotivated, and I said to myself, you know what? It was better for me to have stayed in Liberia and work as program manager than taking up this assignment. But also, I was challenged. I was challenged for the fact that I have served as president of the Federation of Liberian Youth, and I've made so much mark on the landmark of youth development in Liberia, and some of those listening to me can attest. And so I felt obligated to make sure that I succeed and do not fail. And beyond that, my inner man kept telling me that, look, you have to succeed. You must do all you can to succeed. And so I felt it was an obligation to send a very strong message to the rest of the young people who saw me as a role model and have been following me over time. In view of all of that, citizens were quite surprised and distrusted the government when the information about the virus was announced, and it became clear that the virus, the sources of the virus was from bushmeat, and people who they were communicating to about bushmeat have been eating bushmeat for years. Bushmeat, has been their protein and their sources of income for centuries. So to grab one morning and tell them that, look, bushmeat has become your killer was quite a challenging message to pass on. So yes, it was quite tough and quite difficult, but because I kept reminding myself that I have a generation that rely on me as role model. I needed to do all I can to succeed. So we managed to sail through them.
Wow, that's amazing. So it's so interesting now that we're seeing with COVID, how it completely changes things that we've always taken for granted, like being able to go to the gym, being able to take your kids to school, just things that have always been a certain way. Where we're seeing that change, and it's really hard to make changes, especially when those changes are cultural changes. What else? What we're also seeing with COVID is that there's a lot of rumors going around. There's a lot of false information, misinformation. What kind of rumors are going around about Ebola when it first started?
So unfortunately, there were so many rumors moving around. So, for example, I recall people accusing the then president of Sierra Leone being the mastermind behind the virus because he wanted to cleave onto power. There was the slogan people had for him called "After You, Now You," which means he wanted to succeed himself after his official tenure came to an end. There were allegations about leaders in the countries that were affected that they received money from the West to allow them experiment biochemical weapon in the region. And so all of those kinds of myths were there. People didn't believe, they distrusted the system. And so all of those kinds of challenges existed. And we see some of them even today as we all rally around to fight the COVID-19 virus.
Mm-hmm. So they weren't trusting government. They didn't believe it was real. So what did that lead to? During the peak of Ebola, can you tell us what was happening on the ground? Some kind of examples of what that led to?
Just to give your audience the state of affairs at that time. So by the third quarter of 2014, the virus had taken over about 85% of the entire country. And health workers were on strike demanding for better condition of service. But by December 2014, about 100 cases of the virus were being reported. Laboratory tests were being reported. About 100 persons reported being infected on a daily basis. In that same period, about 25 persons were dying on a daily basis. That number is not equivalent to what we see in the rest of the world today, but that was quite huge for us because we were confronting a virus that we were encountering for the first time. People were still consulting traditional healing for their medical needs. When people were sick, they still wanted to go to traditional healers, which were quite risky. Families were hiding their sick loved ones and burying the dead in secret. All of those things were compounding the response efforts, were making it quite difficult for the response effort to gain hold of what we wanted to change. So those are some of the challenges that were confronting the response efforts at that time.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense. And were there also, I also heard in some of the other countries that we worked in, there was also some attacks on healthcare workers and on aid workers. Did you also face that in Sierra Leone?
Oh yes, it happened in Sierra Leone, it happened in Guinea. Because people distrusted the system, they kept finding a way to react. And those are some of the ways they were reacting. First, because the response efforts did not take community participation into key consideration, which became quite important when we all realized that the way to defeat the virus is to make sure communities take ownership and communities provide leadership. That was the way we managed to get things under control and to get things going the way we wanted it to go.
Okay, no, that's a perfect segue. So, so how did you guys decide to address all these issues? What did you guys decide to do?
So first there was a challenge. Yeah, of course, at the set, but first there was a challenge at the state level to provide the kind of leadership that was required. But after we all realized, civil society, government, community, international community, we all recognized that it was important for us to reconsolidate. And so when we reconsolidated, one of the areas that we found ourselves that we felt was quite important for us to contribute was to join the communication pillar of the National Response Team. What the National Response Team was about was, it was a structure that the government set in place to facilitate and coordinate the response efforts. So Search for Common Ground, because we are quite reputable for producing high-quality behavior change messages. We went ahead to adapt one of our radio programs, Tuna Ayana. We produced 40 episodes of special edition of that program and aired on 27 radio stations to promote behavior change across the country. In addition to that, we produced jingles and sport messages on a variety of themes, including stigma, trauma, transmission, treatment, Roman management, etc., so that we're able to bring all of the messaging into context. We also partnered with state institutions that have capacity to allow us broadcast and reinforce our messages in key and strategic points where people were gathering to listen to what both state and non-state actors had to say about the virus. And so those were the way we reinforced our position to be able to contribute to the response efforts.
No, that's amazing. And it sounds like it's a lot of it's really, like you said, like trying to figure out how to give the community ownership over this and moving the ownership from a top-down thing to really involving everyone in the community and building trust and able to do that. So, you know, we get this a lot. Many would think that peace builders during a pandemic, it doesn't quite make sense. They might think that it's just government or media or health professionals, but what role do peace players play? What unique thing do you think that your team really brought to the table when it came to the crisis?
I think there are a couple of them. I've mentioned some of them, but first of all, credibility. We brought credibility to the table. At least stakeholders in Sierra Leone know that Search for Common Ground over the last 14 years has demonstrated strong degree of credibility in its work and in its engagement with other actors. And so that was what we brought on the table. As I said, there are several radio programs that we produce, but one of the radio programs that stand up very tall among most of our radio programs is Atuna Ayana. It has a very dedicated audience. And so we had to adapt that program to respond to the needs of the population in terms of the messages we wanted to hear. We didn't go about telling people that if you catch Ebola, you will die. We had to change that narrative because that's not what people wanted to hear. And so we have on the ground, at that time, we had the 27 radio stations that we were partnering with. Some of them, we set them up ourselves. Some of them, we built capacity for them for years. So because they were on the ground, they were in charge of leadership. And all we were doing was to promote our messages through them. It became quite easier for community people to accept and appreciate what we were saying to them because they already knew the name of Search for Common Ground Talking Drum Studio as we are known locally. So people could resonate with our messages. And so they now begin to understand that there was a need for them to see things differently, despite all of the disbeliefs they have about what has happened. But it's important for us to fight the virus together and end what the virus has brought onto us.
That's so powerful, Jimmy. Thank you so much. And now I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about Ebola and how it affected you personally. What impact did, you know, because like I said, you're living in it. Your friends and family is living during this outbreak. It was so real for you. How did it affect you and your work?
Yeah, so first of all, my family was still in Liberia at the time the Ebola was progressing. And the death toll, because at that time, before the second quarter, Liberia became the epicenter. So the death toll in Liberia was quite increasing, and then my family was still in Liberia. I was worried flights were being banned from coming to the region. So all of those difficulties entrapped me to some extent, and it was becoming really challenging for me. But in the midst of that confusion, I read in one of the local dailies that about 14 health workers were being moved from the community where I come from to Monrovia in quarantine center because they were suspected to be infested with the virus. And I knew more than half of those health workers. In addition to that, I came to work one morning, it was a story coming from back home. And then I saw the photo of a schoolmate of mine, former schoolmate of mine, with whom we were quite close. Saw her photo, she's been killed by the virus, and I knew that this was becoming quite difficult to manage. So in that state of confusion, I kept struggling to concentrate and to reorganize myself. But I reached to a point and went back to what I was faced with in early May to say, I can't fail. I must succeed. So I had to reconsider a date and organize myself to begin to move forward with the response efforts in Sierra Leone that I was directly contributing towards.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jimmy, for sharing that. I mean, I can't even imagine that kind of pressure it would feel to do that, but you guys handled yourself with, you guys made such a huge difference there. So you have to feel good about the difference that you guys made for your community.
Thank you.
Okay, so what advice would you give our viewers who might be struggling with fear and mistrust in that sense of being overwhelmed? What advice would you give them?
So first, this is our new normal. We have to face that. So all I can say to you is you should not trust anyone, but also respect those who distrust you. That's what I can say.
Mm-hmm.
You can't trust anyone, not even your brother, not even your sister, not even your wife, but also respect them when they distrust you too, because that's our new normal.
Yeah, everyone is getting new, different information, and sometimes it's hard to check, and so it's so important to really check our sources and have conversations, and like you're saying, really make sure that even if we feel like we can't trust what other people are saying, to make sure that we're always trying to truly respect each other. And so now let's talk about a little bit of these barriers that you might have faced when you're trying to address Ebola and the spread of it. What were some of the biggest barriers that you faced, and how did you overcome them? And then and do you see any similarities between those barriers with Ebola and the barriers that we might be facing with COVID?
I mean, definitely. I mean, issues of changing cultural norms or modified norms were some of the barriers. Norms were some of the barriers that we had to face. Mm-hmm. Of course, physical distancing is being presented today, which prevents people from shaking hands. For example, those of us in this region, I mean, we do a lot of shaking hands. We've been asked to stay away from those. It can be quite challenging how to cope with that, Mm-hmm. And families reporting their sick family members to medical institutions and healthcare workers that they do not trust can be a big challenge. So you don't trust the system, but then you have to report to the system that your relatives is ill. Can be a big challenge for anyone. And that is exactly what we are encouraging people to do, to be able to report no matter what. If they don't trust the system, they have to respect that they need to report so that people know exactly what the status of those family members are, so that the response efforts get to reach to a point where we slow it down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And and then what about when the threat ends? So pretty soon, we don't know how long COVID is going to last. It could be a short amount of time. It could be longer. I don't even want to speak it into existence. Yeah. But what were some of the challenges that you faced when Ebola started to end? What challenge did you face then?
Of course, even before it ends, we've already started seeing them. So issues about stigma, issues of discrimination became the norm that we all faced and confronted at the time when the Ebola ended. Even today, people who have been reported of having the virus, they've been stigmatized. Mm-hmm. And what that brings to me is just after the civil crisis, communities discriminated. I mean, young men who took arms from their community, the communities, they now want them to come back. So all of those kinds of things will exist when these kinds of crises take place. It had to take the efforts of such and other peace builders to support the reintegration process for communities to accept former combatants to be reintegrated into their society. In this case, it's not the same as what happened during the civil crisis, but we cannot discriminate against people for illness that they have no control over. Any of us can be a victim to COVID, as it was with Ebola. So we cannot go about discriminating ourselves in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the unfortunate fact that we have to face during and even after the crisis ends.
Mm-hmm. No, you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's hard to even think after, but I think that's it's also interesting to think about those challenges. Okay, and then so one more question before we open it up for our audience. So audience, if you're there, start thinking about what you want to ask if you haven't already posted it, and then we'll get to those. But what are the biggest takeaways from Ebola, and what do you think could help us most with COVID?
So for me, there are a few of them. So one, I mean, it has become clear that no matter how resource a country's health system is, if the system is overwhelmed, it's challenging for the system to cope.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, health education should be at the center of healthcare system strengthening. That's very important. Two, issues of accountability. Of course, you might have heard or read about how some INGOs and other institutions that came over to support the Ebola response took all the resources they had to support, they took them away. So what we've learned coming from there is to make sure that we have accountability mechanisms built into the response efforts so that when the response ends, we are not distracted about allegations of corruption, but that we are moving forward because we've been able to do our best in our response efforts. Thirdly, issues of restrictions and lockdowns. As rational as it appears, it poses a lot of challenge to poverty-striking communities. So it's important for us to be able to think through, carefully conceive them, carefully plan them, carefully execute them, so that it does not do more harm than good. Already, there are millions of people dying from hunger. If you lock down a community where people in that community only step out of the community on a daily basis to fend for food and come back in the evening before having a meal, and you stop them from moving,
Mm-hmm.
it means you are almost killing them. But last point is community leadership and ownership in emergencies of this nature can make a big difference. They have knowledge, they have local expertise, and we need to build on those.
Oh, Jimmy, so good. Oh, thank you so much. Okay, so I'm about to open up for questions.
Thank you, welcome.
Yeah, so again, thank you for all that. Such important stuff for us to hear and to think through. So I'm about to open it up for some questions. I'm already seeing we got a few here, and so we'll answer those. Before I do, I also want to say, give people an opportunity. So if you guys want to support peace builders like Jimmy and Jimmy's work, we're gonna leave a link so that you can give and you can support peace builders like Jimmy that are working through things around COVID right now, as well as a ton of other issues in the world. So just to let you know that the link is going up to give and support. So thank you for that. Okay, so let's see, questions. So let's do first one by Rosemary. From Rosemary, how did the virus impact community social cohesion? And what steps were useful during and after in response to rebuild the social cohesion?
Of course, it did. It did impact on communities' social cohesion. So, for example, even we have cases today of discrimination at community level in terms of community members stigmatizing families that were impacted by the virus. That alone impacted on how people live in a community. But what was important was when, as I said, when it became recognized that community ownership and leadership was a driving force, it was easier for those very community leaders, radio stations, community structures to come back together to begin to work at trying to minimize the impact of stigma and discrimination against people who were impacted negatively by the Ebola crisis. Remember, the Ebola crisis, created orphans. Children lost their parents, their parents. So it impacted on community social cohesion quite negatively. But because community ownership at some point took center stage, including the role of community radios. We saw that people were quickly able to adapt and move forward with their lives. Even though it's not significantly done with, but of course, it's now better in my view.
Okay, thank you, Jimmy. And for those of you watching on Facebook Live, you can also type your comments in or your questions into the comments, and then we'll have some of our searchers put them into the Q&A here so that we can see them. So just to know, if you're watching on Facebook, you can still ask questions. Okay, next question from Shamal Idris, which is our CEO of Search for Common Ground. Hi, Shamal. So Shamal asked, how did you balance communicating honestly and truthfully about the very real danger of the disease with the need to fuel and inspire hope, without which people can become very fatalistic? Like if it comes, it comes. But also and not take important public health risks. So
first, it is even more dangerous to try to be dishonest about your communication, because at the end of the day, people will get to know what you are telling them. Communities have knowledge, they understand the issues you're saying to them. It's just that they don't have the technical capacity to be able to harness what you're giving to them, package what you're giving to them in a way that they're able to absorb. So the first thing that you need to consider is, what is your credibility? And what is the credibility of the message you are communicating? So if the messenger is not credible, if the message is not credible, the entire response will fail. So that is why such begins to be such an important inspiration in the process of communicating to the people of Sierra Leone and the rest of the region where we are known as Talking Drum Studio. Because our messages have been credible for years. People have trusted what we say to them. They've dedicated their time. I've heard stories of people say, I'm going from the farm 6 p.m. to listen to Atuna Ayana. I have to go back home to listen to the radio program, because they trusted the messenger. And so when we went back to reconsolidate ourselves and reorganize our messaging, it was easier for people to trust what we were saying to them, because they've trusted us for about 14 years. Yeah. So the first thing I can say, if I were to advise you, is that be a credible messenger. Yes. And make sure your messages are quite credible.
Yes, credible.
Without which you are in trouble.
Yes, no, exactly. So many times we just we think our message is credible, and we forget that our messenger is just as much, if not more important. Who is telling people this, and do they trust it? So thank you.
Just before you close on this, somebody will ask you and say, "Who are you? What authority do you have to say this to me?"
Yes.
So then you have to explain to them the authority you have to say this to them. So our authority as such for Common Ground was that we've been doing this for over 14 years. And so if you go back to where we're coming from the civil crisis, your community will tell you what Talking Drum Studio is. And I think on the basis of that, people thought it was important for them to take us serious, including stakeholders and government.
Yeah, no, and that's been a pillar for Search to really be entrenched in communities for long term. And so we have a lot of countries like that where we've been there for like over decades, and so people really know and trust. And not only is it helpful for the people that you're trying to communicate to, but it also helps you do your job better, because the other people that you need to bring in. So the other leaders that you need to engage, and really kind of all those stakeholders as well, which actually is a good kind of segue to one of these next questions we have from Rosemary. So she wants to know about the dynamics that you saw between Search for Common Ground and the coordination between national actors and other international organizations like the UN and other NGOs.
No, as I said at the beginning, sorry, it was messy. We didn't even think we were going to make progress if we had held onto our individual positions. Because I know of story where organizations were putting out messages because they wanted to be seen as responding, as participating in a response. But over time, when all stakeholders recognized that there was a need for us to be able to reconsolidate and reorganize ourselves, that's when the National Response Center took center stage to provide leadership. So all the communication informations were being cleared by them. I mean, social mobilization were being passed through them. So all the other response efforts that were going back to the communities to support had to go clear by them. So I record we were attending, meetings 2-3 times in a day just to clarify and adapt some of the processes that we wanted to use. So without which the response could not have gained the momentum it gained along the way. So when all of us agree that proper coordination, proper messaging, and then getting the right messenger to deliver the message will have been the way for us to go, we now change the strategy. And by the time we change the strategy, we now put the community at the center. For us, our community stakeholders were the community radio stations. Because they live in the community, we've trained them, we work with them, and we have dedicated and commitment citizens to our airtime schedule. So we didn't change our airtime schedule. We kept the same time we've been airing our radio programs, and then began to broadcast our new episodes through those radio programs to be able to reinforce that. So that's where I can come from in terms of responding to your question. So there was a recognition on the part of all stakeholders that it's important for us to do things differently, change the approach, change the strategy, get the right messengers to step forward and provide the information that was required.
Awesome. Yeah, no, because you also had to play that coordination role between all those groups and everything. No, really great question. Okay, I got another question. So first, they want to thank you. Jimmy, thank you for doing this. You identified health education as a vital element of effectively combating outbreaks like Ebola and the coronavirus. Can you speak to how effective education or how to effectively educate on health when trust is low and when there is contradictory information that people can do to keep themselves and their families safe?
So first, you might have heard about healthcare strengthening after Ebola. That was the biggest message. Even today, we've come to recognize that our healthcare system is not still strengthening. So when I talk about health education, I'm not talking about health education only in an emergency. I'm talking about making health education an integral part of health system strengthening so that people have the information they need, so that when they are confronted with these kinds of emergencies, they know exactly what to do. So people are not confused and running here and there without knowing exactly what to do. But if you give them the knowledge, you give them the information they need in advance of these kinds of emergency, it might help to reduce the anxiety that exists when these kinds of things happen.
Yeah, it's very preventative, and it could so like it should start now, but it's something that should always just be a part of communication, and
part of, yes.
Something like this to let us know where there's weaknesses in our infrastructure and even on our communication infrastructure. So thank you for that question. Okay, I have one more. Let's see. So this is a question about community level resilience. So what community level resilience strategies emerged through Ebola, and how transferable are these to COVID? So
first, you are talking about a country or a region that was engulfed with civil crisis for more than 10 years, with massive displacement of people. Mm-hmm. The economy destroyed, I would say. Lives destroyed. So Ebola was just compounding the experiences of the people. So for citizens to bounce back, all they needed was to take them back to their communities. And so their livelihood, the way they survive, they were going to make way to survive. And of course, I mean, institutions with the right set of skills managed to intervene to help communities to cope and to be resilient to the challenges they face. We also did that. For example, we work with community women. We call expanding the table. Considering that even before Ebola crisis, men has always been the ones inviting women to the table. So that project was intended to provide women the table so that they, this time around, invite men around the table. I can share with the final evaluation. It was quite successful. Women now had the space to bring men over. So all of that was helping communities to be resilient to the challenges that confronted them, but also to be able to respond in case there are similar kind of situations that unfolded, because we had the information that once the crisis ended, there might be a reemergence of Ebola at some point in time. So we should be prepared for that. So communities were preparing if there was any such thing that came up in the future. So that's how it is. So the 14 years of civil crisis and the Ebola crisis was something that was confronting us for the first time, the Ebola crisis. But challenges are things that we faced in the past and we've overcome them.
So there's a follow-on question to that. So did Ebola affect women and men differently? And do you see the same thing happening with COVID?
Of course, there's affected women and men differently. And I can't speak to the actual evaluations that were done to point exactly to how women were impacted. But for example, if a woman has, like for example, 6 children, which is common here, and that woman's husband got killed by Ebola, imagine what that means for that family. Because the husband here, he's the one who steps out and finds everything to make sure the children go to school, there is Medicare, there is meal for the family. And if that wife unfortunately loses her husband to Ebola, you can imagine the impact.
Mm-hmm. So it was affecting, it was just the whole family dynamics and everything with roles and family and things like that as well. Okay, and we have a question from Raphael. How can we impart the importance of peace building to health responses, to donors and institutional partners? How do we impart the importance of peace building of health responses? So how do we show that how important peace building is to health? Like how do we draw those ties and make that case for donors and for other institutional partners?
But of course, I mean, see how we can show that by just presenting what is happening across the group. How many, I mean, resistance largely taking place in communities when governments instruct lockdowns. How security forces will have to come in the street to enforce. You don't.
Oh no, Jimmy, we might have lost you. We did so good with the Sierra Leone internet for so long. Okay, I'm gonna give you a second to come back on. We might have to turn, we're about to close anyway, so this might be okay. So to everyone listening, we had one more question, but I think we might close it out for now. We're gonna try to kind of keep this to 45 minutes if we could. I think Jimmy's gonna, oh wait, are you back?
Yes, I'm back.
You're back. No worries, that's great. I didn't want to wrap this up without you. So go ahead, you can finish what you were saying, Jimmy. And we might have to actually turn off your, video. So it's just your voice. Let's see. Okay. So we'll see if we can get Jimmy back. But again, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. So we're gonna be doing, oh wait, is he back? No, okay. We're gonna be doing these a lot more often. And so, we would love your feedback. If you enjoy these kind of conversations, like I said, please, if you want to make sure that you get every invite to these and other tips on how to use peace building in the common ground approach in your own life, in your communities, through whatever major issues are going on, please sign up for Pathfinders. Make sure that you can always give and support search as well. It means a lot to us. And Jimmy, are you there? I see you, but you're on mute. Oh no, he's still on mute. Okay, wait, okay. You're off mute. Yes. Try again.
Yeah, so I hope. Hello?
Okay, you're there. We're good.
So as I was saying, our role as peace builders will have to go beyond waiting for the crisis for us to be able to respond. We need to now begin to look at the challenges that confront societies, systems, and processes, and see how we are able to intervene to be able to make sure that we do not have these kinds of challenges when we have crisis at hand. Because when we have crisis, we need to confront the crisis together. But if one group feels that the crisis is against them, then it becomes a big challenge. And that's what we are faced today.
Yeah, we have to fight the crisis together and show that we are partners with our healthcare workers and with governments and media and with everybody else, how we can all, that collaboration is a cure. And final last question we'll wrap up is, and this is great because we're focusing on youth a lot this year, but how can youth be more effective how can youth be more effective in situations where communities and elders in traditional societies tend to not listen to their voice or rebuff their voice? We'll see if we still have Jimmy. Okay, you guys, so to say, if you guys have any more questions, so I think we're gonna wrap it up here. If you guys have more questions, feel free to continue to write them in the comments, especially if you are on our events page or on Facebook or wherever. Feel free to write your questions that you have, and we'll try to make sure we get them to Jimmy and we can see if we can get some more questions answered. Like I said, we're hoping to do more of these with our peace builders on the ground all over the world. I hope that you enjoyed today. I hope you sign up for Pathfinders. We appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for all of your support during this time, taking time out of your day to be here and to listen. Really appreciate it. Please feel free to share this video with anyone and everyone. And yeah, thanks you guys so much. We really appreciate you guys today.